Everyone tells you marriage means someone always has your back, until the one time you actually need it, and the answer is, not my problem. My name is Daniel Ashford. I'm 54 years old, and I live in Millbrook Falls, Ohio, in the same beige split-level house I've lived in for 19 years, where every Sunday morning I make 2 cups of coffee out of habit, even on the mornings I drink alone. I used to believe that if you gave someone 17 years of your life, they'd give you 5 minutes of theirs when it mattered. I was wrong, and it took 38 phone calls in one afternoon for me to understand exactly how wrong. Before I get into what happened, I want to ask you something small. If stories like this one matter to you, if you've ever been the person who quietly held a family together while nobody noticed, hit subscribe. It costs you nothing, but it tells me you're still listening, and that means more than you'd think. Now let me tell you about my wife. Her name is Renee Ashford, and I married her when I was 37. We'd been together for 17 years by the time this all started, long enough that I knew her coffee order without asking. Oat milk, 2 pumps of vanilla, extra hot, from the same drive-through every single morning. She kept a spiral notebook on the kitchen counter where she wrote her step count in pencil every single day, like she was keeping score against herself. She hummed old Fleetwood Mac songs off-key while she did dishes. She had a habit of checking her phone under the dinner table when she thought I wasn't looking, and I'd always assumed it was just her sister texting about nothing. She kept the thermostat 2 degrees colder than I liked, and never once asked if that bothered me. She always parked her car nose out in the garage for a quick exit, she used to joke, and I never once asked her what she thought she'd need to exit from. I thought I knew this woman down to the bone. I thought 17 years bought you that. The day before it all started was about as ordinary as they come. I got up at 5:45, fed the dog, drove to the plant where I've worked as a shift supervisor for 22 years, ate a turkey sandwich in my truck during lunch because the break room was too loud, clocked out at 4, stopped at the hardware store for furnace filters, and came home to find Renee already on the couch with her laptop, the blue light hitting her face the way it did most nights now. Nothing about that day suggested anything was coming. That's usually how it goes, isn't it? The disaster never announces itself in advance. The call came in at 6:40 that evening. It was my mother's neighbor, Carol Denny, a retired school teacher who'd lived next door to my mom for almost 30 years and checked on her most evenings out of pure decency. "Daniel, honey, it's Carol," she said, and I could hear something tight in her voice right away. "Your mom's not doing good. She's dizzy. She's got chest pain. I think we need to get her to the ER, like now, not tomorrow." I asked if she'd called an ambulance. "She won't let me," Carol said. "You know how she is. She doesn't want the bill. She says, if you can just come get her." And that's when I remembered my truck was at Baymont Auto Repair with a blown alternator and wouldn't be ready until the next afternoon. "Okay, Carol, I'm figuring it out. Give me 5 minutes," I told her, and I hung up and walked straight into the living room where Renee was still on her laptop. "Hey, I need your car," I said. "My mom's having chest pains. Carol thinks it's serious. I need to get her to Millbrook General." Renee didn't even look up right away. When she did, her face had this flat, unbothered look I'd never seen aimed at me before. "I've got an early call tomorrow. I need the car charged and ready. I can't have you running around town with it tonight." I stood there for a second, thinking I'd misheard her. "Renee, this is my mom. This isn't running around." She closed the laptop halfway, like even that required effort. "Not my problem, Daniel. Figure it out." I asked her again, calmer than I felt, if she understood what I was telling her. Chest pain, 82 years old, alone in her house. She just shrugged one shoulder. "Call an Uber. Call your sister. I'm not doing this tonight." I looked at her for a long moment, feeling something in my chest go cold and quiet. in a way anger usually doesn't. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just said okay, and I picked my phone back up, called a rideshare, and got my mother to the hospital myself, sitting in the back of a stranger's Corolla, holding her hand while she pressed her free palm flat against her sternum and told me it wasn't as bad as it looked. It turned out to be a minor cardiac event, not a heart attack, thank God, but serious enough that they kept her overnight for monitoring. I sat in a plastic chair in the ER hallway until almost 2 a.m., watching nurses come and go, listening to a vending machine hum 2 doors down, and Renee texted me exactly once, at 9:14 p.m., "Let me know if you need anything." Not "how is she?" Not "I'm sorry," just a line that covered her without costing her anything. I want to pause here and tell you something nobody tells you about betrayal. It rarely walks in the front door wearing a mask. It walks in quietly, in a small refusal, in a shrug over a laptop, in the word problem attached to your own mother's chest pain. You don't recognize it as betrayal in the moment. You just feel a door close somewhere inside you, and you keep moving because someone still needs a ride to the hospital. The next morning, I picked my mum up from Millbrook General around 11, got her settled at her place with Carol checking in, and drove my rental car. Baymont had lent me a loaner while my truck got fixed, back home around 1 in the afternoon, expecting a normal Tuesday. What I got instead was 38 missed calls from Renee, spread out between 11:20 a.m. and 3:45 p.m., each one closer together than the last, like she was climbing some kind of ladder of panic. No voicemail, no text explaining why. Just call after call after call, and when I finally picked up on the 39th attempt, her voice came through sharp and fast in a way I hadn't heard from her in years. "Where's the car, Daniel? Where is my car right now?" I told her exactly where it was, parked in the garage, exactly where she'd left it the night before, since I'd used a rideshare and then a loaner, never touching her precious car at all. There was a long silence on the line, long enough that I actually pulled the phone away to check the call hadn't dropped. "You didn't take it," she finally said, and something in her tone had shifted from panic to something closer to dread. "No," I said, "I did exactly what you told me to do. I figured it out myself." Another silence. Then, "I need you to check something for me. I need you to go look in the trunk right now, and don't ask me why." I stood in the garage with the phone against my ear and popped the trunk of a car I hadn't touched in over 18 hours, and I found a black gym duffel bag I didn't recognize, unzipped halfway, with the corner of a manila folder sticking out of it, and taped to the outside of that folder was a yellow sticky note in handwriting that wasn't Renee's, that said only, "Confirmed, moving forward Thursday, M." That's when the first crack in my ordinary life opened up, and everything after it started moving fast enough that I didn't get much say in it at all. Starting with a phone call 2 days later, not from Renee, but from a man who introduced himself as Detective Ray Holloman with the Millbrook Falls Financial Crimes Unit, asking if I had a few minutes to answer some questions about irregular activity tied to accounts I didn't even know existed under my name. Here's something nobody tells you about the moment you become a suspect in your own life. It doesn't feel dramatic. Detective Holloman didn't slam a folder on a table or raise his voice. He was polite, almost gentle, which was somehow worse, because gentle people asking careful questions make you realize how much they already know that you don't. I sat across from him in a beige interview room that smelled like burnt coffee, and I understood for the first time that being innocent doesn't feel like safety. It feels like standing in a room where everyone else already has the map, and you're the only one still lost. Holloman laid it out plainly. Someone had opened a secondary account at Millbrook Community Trust 11 months earlier, listing my name as a joint holder, with a signature that resembled mine closely enough to pass a teller's glance, but not a forensic one. Deposits had moved through that account in amounts of $9,200, $8,700, $9,400, always comfortably under the $10,000 threshold that triggers automatic federal reporting. Structuring, he called it, a word I'd only ever heard on television. He asked where I'd been on 4 specific dates over the past year. He asked if I recognized the name M. Corliss. I didn't, not then. He asked, almost as an afterthought, whether my wife had access to my social security number and old checkbooks, and I said of course she did. We'd been married 17 years, and I watched him write something down, without changing his expression at all. I left that station with his card in my pocket, and a feeling in my stomach, like the floor had been quietly removed from under a house I'd lived in my whole life, without ever checking the foundation. I remember sitting in the parking lot afterward for almost 20 minutes, just gripping the steering wheel, not driving anywhere, watching a janitor wheel a trash can across the lot like it was any other Tuesday for him. 2 nights later, unable to sleep, I went looking through Renee's home office for anything, a bank statement, a bill, anything that might explain the duffel bag, the sticky note, the account with my forged signature on it. In the bottom drawer of her desk, underneath a stack of old tax returns, I found a fireproof lockbox I didn't know we owned. I found the key taped inside the false bottom of her jewelry box, in a spot she probably thought I'd never look, and inside that box I found 4 things that rearranged 17 years of my life in about 4 minutes. A second phone, powered off, a folder of wire transfer receipts going back nearly 3 years, all routed to an account under the name Marcus Corliss, a life insurance policy on my 82-year-old mother, taken out 14 months earlier, listing Renee as the sole beneficiary for $250,000, and a single photograph of Renee and a man I didn't recognize, taken at what looked like a lake house, her hand resting on his forearm in a way that told me everything the photograph never needed to say out loud. I sat on the floor of that office for a long time, 17 anniversaries, 17 years of oat milk coffee orders and pencil-marked step counts, and Fleetwood Mac hummed off-key over dishes I'd helped her wash 1,000 times. I thought about how many of those nights she'd been sitting 3 feet away from me on that couch, laptop glowing, already 3 years into building a second life I wasn't invited to. I thought about the nose-out parking in the garage, and for the first time, it didn't sound like a joke anymore. If you've been with me for a while, you already know I don't do things the loud way. Before I tell you what came next, I need you to understand something about patience. The people who hurt you the most quietly are rarely in a hurry, and that means the only way to catch them is to be even less in a hurry than they are. The next morning, I called my college roommate, Preston Vance, who spent the last 20 years as a forensic accountant untangling exactly this kind of mess for a living. I brought him the folder, the receipts, the policy, everything. We sat at his kitchen table for 3 hours while he walked me through it, and it was less like a conversation and more like being slowly handed the truth in pieces small enough that I could survive each one. How long have these transfers been going, based on what you've got? He asked, spreading the receipts out chronologically. I don't know. You tell me. He tapped the earliest date. 34 months. Almost 3 years, Daniel. That's not possible. I would have noticed the money. Would you? You said she handled the household accounts. When's the last time you actually logged into the joint checking yourself? I opened my mouth and then closed it, because the honest answer was embarrassing. Probably 8, 9 months, since Renee always said she had a system, and I trusted the system because I trusted her. Here's what I'm seeing, Preston said. Structured withdrawals from 3 joint or adjacent accounts, timed just under reporting thresholds, moving into an account under a name that isn't yours or hers. That's not impulsive. That's someone who read the rules and built a plan around them. He tapped the insurance policy next. This is the part that worries me more than the money. A $250,000 policy on your mother, taken out 14 months ago, with your wife as sole beneficiary. Did your mother consent to this? Sign anything? My mother didn't even know this existed. I didn't know it existed. Preston looked at me for a long moment. Then someone forged consent, or found a way around it. Daniel, I need you to hear this part clearly. The night your mum had chest pains and Renee refused you the car. Look at the dates again. He slid the folder toward me, and there it was, a transfer dated the very next morning, $9,100, moving out within hours of my mother's hospital admission being logged. I think your mother's health scare wasn't an inconvenience to her that night. I think it might have been a trigger to move faster. I sat back in that chair and did the math I'd been avoiding. 3 years of a second phone, 3 years of a man named Marcus Corliss, 3 years of pencil marks in a step count notebook that had nothing to do with steps at all, and a policy that made my mother worth more to my wife dead than alive. Here's what I want you to understand. If you're listening to this, and you've ever trusted someone with the quiet parts of your life, the calculation isn't just how much money is gone. It's realizing you have to go back through every soft moment and ask which ones were real. I did not call a divorce lawyer that week. I did not confront her across the dinner table. I did not call Detective Holloman back and hand him everything I had. Not yet. I did not do the thing that would let her know I'd found the box, because the moment she knew, she'd have time to clean it up, close accounts, disappear the second phone for good, and leave me standing there with nothing but suspicion and a marriage in ashes. I decided, instead, to do the only thing that ever actually works against someone who's been patient for 3 years. I decided to be more patient than she was. I called my sister, Kathleen, who'd spent 11 years in corporate security, doing exactly the kind of documentation work I needed now. She drove in from Columbus the next weekend, sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, and didn't waste a single word. You need 3 things, she said: a timeline with dates and dollar amounts, copies of every document before she can shred them, and proof of intent, texts, emails, anything that shows this was planned, not a misunderstanding. She helped me photograph every page in that lockbox before returning it exactly as I'd found it. She helped me set up a secure cloud folder Renee had no access to. She showed me how to quietly pull 3 years of bank statements without triggering a notification to Renee's phone. Don't get emotional in front of her, Kathleen said, looking me dead in the eye. Every day you act normal is a day she thinks she's still winning. Let her think that. So I performed. For 23 days, I performed a marriage I no longer believed in. I said good morning. I asked about her day. I sat through 2 of her work dinners and laughed at the right moments. At our anniversary dinner that Thursday, the same one, I'd later realize that the sticky note in the trunk had referenced. I held Renee's hand across the table at Marchetti's, the same restaurant we'd gone to every year since our wedding, and when she reached over and hugged me goodnight in the parking lot, I felt absolutely nothing, just the specific, hollow sensation of holding a stranger who happened to smell familiar, like perfume worn by someone wearing my wife's face. I want to be honest with you about what that costs a person. 23 days of smiling at someone while you're quietly building the case that will end everything between you takes something out of you that doesn't come back easily. I lost weight I didn't have to lose. I stopped sleeping past 4 in the morning. I sat next to my mother's hospital bed on 2 separate follow-up visits, holding her hand, saying nothing about the $250,000 policy sitting in a lockbox with her name on it and Renee's signature underneath a forgery of consent she never gave. If this story has meant anything to you so far, I genuinely appreciate you hitting that subscribe button before we go further. It helps this channel keep telling stories like this one, and honestly, it helps me too, knowing someone's listening. On the 24th day, everything I'd built quietly for 3 weeks was about to collide head-on with something I hadn't planned for at all, because that morning, a black SUV I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway, and the man who stepped out of it wasn't Detective Holloman. He introduced himself as an investigator, working a separate case, one involving a name I already knew, Marcus Corliss, and the first thing out of his mouth was, "Mr. Ashford, I think you and I need to compare notes, because what I've found doesn't match what your wife told the bank at all."